Senator Greg Taylor accused of sexual harassment, the Tax Review Task Force's recommendations, plus no recommendations from a Medicaid oversight board, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending November 22nd, 2024.
Indiana Week in Review is made possible by the supporters of Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
This week, Democratic leader Greg Taylor was largely silent about sexual harassment allegations against him. Taylor made his first public comments on Organization Day at the State House, one day after an Indianapolis Star story detailed those accusations. Taylor made remarks on the Senate floor Tuesday about the upcoming legislative session, but did not directly reference the sexual harassment allegations from 3 women in the Star story, allegations that his statement to the Star did not deny.
And I will let my actions speak louder than any word I could say from this microphone. I will continue to fight for those who think they don't have a voice.
Senate Republican leader Roderick Bray told reporters he's extremely disappointed in Taylor.
I've expressed that to him. We conduct ourselves at a much higher level than that.
Taylor refused to answer any questions from reporters. Should Taylor remain in his position as Senate Minority Leader? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, Kayla Dwyer, State House reporter for the Indianapolis Star, and Niki Kelly, editor-in-chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Ann DeLaney, how can Senate Democrats justify re-electing Taylor as their leader?
I don't think they can. I mean, I don't think he should have stood for re-election, and I don't think they should have voted for him. I mean, when you look at what's happening nationally, when you have people who are accused of paying for sex with underage minors being nominated for high-level cabinet positions, and Fox News guys going into the Department of Defense and have allegations similarly, it is inexcusable, I think, that the Democrats did what they did. How's that? Were you surprised by that?
I actually wasn't. No, I wasn't surprised. I don't know how anyone can defend this. So what we now know about how that vote for leader went down was, among the 10 members, Senator Andrea Hundley from Indianapolis went out for minority leader. She tried to get that. Senator Rodney Pohl from Northwest Indiana, Senator J.D. Ford from Indianapolis, and Senator Shelley Yoder from Bloomington supported her, but that's just 4. And so the other 6 members of the caucus clearly threw their weight behind Greg Taylor. How can they talk about that? You know, Taylor talked about it. The caucus, I'm sure, will continue to talk about standing up for women, women's rights, things like that. How can any of those 6 say those things on the Senate floor or anywhere else with a straight face?
I'm at a minimum stunned by the speed of it. Like, this comes out on Monday morning and Monday afternoon, you're holding a vote. I mean,
it was already scheduled.
It was scheduled, but still, but you could also easily push that back,
right? Yeah. But reschedule. I mean, that's what surprised me. I understand and just get to the bottom of it. But the other thing was Taylor. I thought Taylor kind of owned it, but that's even more reason to find out what really happened in his statement. He didn't
deny it.
He didn't say sorry if they felt that way.
No,
or
it was
throwaway,
I made mistakes.
I blurred
fake
the lines.
apology.
I blurred the lines.
You know, and politically, this is the problem. You come out. If you let that pitch go by on Curtis Hill or Matt Gaetz or whatever, like whoever is the accusation of the day, if you're letting those pitches go by, but you're not, you're like calling for Curtis Hill's impeachment, and then you're reelecting. You at least be consistent. Can we be like intellectually consistent? If you think like, no, let's not do anything rash. Nobody step down.
Investigate.
Let's go investigate and figure out and really get to the bottom of what really happened. That's one thing, and this was surprising at least.
I think there's clues in how the Nitskotsky situation was handled in terms of figuring out what happened in that caucus room. As we reported in our story, there was pushback to taking some kind of action against Nitskotsky over due process concerns. And maybe that's a debate that also played out here, because we put a story out there. These allegations are substantiated with our reporting, and Senator Greg Taylor did not deny them. But I could see a world in which maybe there are people who feel that there should be some sort of external investigation. Now, from the women's perspectives, it certainly appears that, you share your stories and then no consequences happen as a result. And that's very discouraging.
That happens a lot. That
happens a lot.
Working
Way
in
too much.
It's working in that building. I mean, it's eye-opening when you hear stories from other women, and that's exactly what happens. They're like, the man tends to win.
Nothing's going to change.
And the woman either just gets to
It's
keep
always
going along
he said,
or not.
she said, as if that kind of thing happens in front of an audience of 10 clergymen.
in both of these cases with Taylor and Niskotsky, Taylor did not deny the allegations and basically admitted that he did what he was accused of doing. Niskotsky admitted that he made a mistake and paid the woman off.
And we saw the text. I mean, there's corroboration in these. These are not just he said, she said.
Right.
And, and the whole due process thing, I get due process when you're talking about a criminal investigation or something. And again, he wasn't called for to resign, but I think you need to err on the side of caution in leadership.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily see the need, since he wasn't denying it and since there was corroboration, I felt like, and I still feel like, not a single one of those other 5 people have stood up to explain their vote to their constituents, and I think that's shameful.
I think that's right, because you're right. There's no criminal charge involved, and if there were, the statute of limitations would have run. Anyway, but the point of it is that there is such a thing as the appearance of impropriety, and when you're in a leadership position, that appearance needs to be observed.
Yeah.
I mean, and the statement from the caucus that was put out later Monday, referring to allegations against a member of the legislature. I wonder which member of the legislature it could have been. Could it have been the person you re-elected as leader?
5 or 6
yeah,
of them,
but the point is, this is happening. This is happening. How you can just basically they're going forward like, oh well, nothing happened.
And
nothing
it's
happened
interesting
whatsoever.
too, the distancing that other statements that have come out, the distancing other bodies are putting between them and these allegations, and the action of the caucus. A statement out of the House sort of was like, that's them. The state party's statement, like, we have nothing to do with caucus elections. Everyone's trying to distance themselves from this, but this is a cultural systemic issue.
Yeah,
should
but there's just, I mean, I get the House.
To do that.
The House, you can do that saying, listen, we have a very different structure. We have our own rules in place. That's one thing. But the state party to go, I mean, that's just a guy over there. We can't do anything about it. That's past.
They can't do anything about it.
Not procedurally, but
They can use the
party.
bully pulpit and pressure those members to ask for another vote. That's what they can do.
And in those districts, the way they're gerrymandered, you can pressure all you want.
Are we really going to pivot to gerrymandering?
But it doesn't matter. But it doesn't.
But it does matter because those 5 are safe. That's the point.
But that's more reason to pressure them.
I don't
That's more reason to
disagree.
pressure. It's not like if Greg Taylor resigns or Greg Taylor steps down from leadership that seat is suddenly going to go to a Republican.
Right.
Why are we fighting and yelling? We all agree.
That's true. We're getting fired up about it, though. All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question, and this week's question is, should Senator Greg Taylor resign following accusations of sexual harassment? A, yes, or B, no. Last week we asked you whether Micah Beckwith will frequently clash with Mike Braun while they serve together in office. 62% of you say yes, 38% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, help is likely on the way for property taxpayers, but that help will also take time. That's the message this week from a state task force that spent the last 2 years reviewing Indiana's tax system.
The task force issued recommendations Wednesday that broadly point towards improving transparency and simplicity in property taxes, providing relief, particularly for those aged 65 and older, and reducing taxes for businesses. Task Force Chair Jeff Thompson says any property tax changes won't affect next year's bills.
People understand that in the 25 session, you can't affect the 25 bills. It'll be 26. That's been the standard. And so I don't see, at least most people, not understanding that.
Democratic Representative Ed DeLaney was the only task force member to vote against the recommendations. He says lawmakers need to take bolder action to address a tax shift over the last decade that's hurt homeowners.
So I think it's time to get serious about what's happened to the tax caps after, 13 years of one-party control and 15 or 16 years of the tax caps. I don't think they're working for the homeowners.
Thompson says the task force avoided more specific recommendations because they would have been too detailed for the task force to agree on.
Mike O'Brien, both Senator Holdman and Representative Thompson kind of have the same line about people will understand it's not going to happen right away. Do you think people will understand lawmakers can't do anything about their property tax bills next year?
I think they're right to set that expectation because of how hard that is.
I agree that nothing is going to happen, but do you think people are going to understand that that's just the way it is?
If you've ever bought a house, I think hopefully you understood what was happening and how you maybe understood how your taxes were being paid or how they do get paid. But you're right. I mean, because you're feeling it now. You're feeling it right now, or you felt it over the last couple of years. You've been feeling
it the last couple of years.
You've been feeling it the last couple of years. And so, but the alternative is, do we do something that also is barely going to be noted, some kind of stimulus check or something? There's been other mechanisms to, in similar situations where the legislature at the state and federal level has tried to provide, immediate relief that really hasn't, that hasn't done a lot.
Then it's about connecting the dots, and that's another leap that you're asking people to make.
I do also want the message. I've got a real problem with the over 65 relief because all of the wealth, or the vast majority of the wealth in this country, is held by people 65 to 74. The percent of wealth held by people 27 to 42 is 6.5%. Those are the people buying houses for the first time. I get that if you're old, you bought a $150,000 house that's now worth $400,000, and that's where your money is. But that is, and now you're feeling that tax bill. But that is wealth. That is where the wealth is, and we're going to go provide. It should at least be means tested, or based on need.
Yeah, and I think there was some observation of maybe the idea of those age 65 or older who are on fixed incomes, although how you define that is the way to do it. In terms of what they will eventually do, the report is very general, very broad, not that specific. Do you think there will be, even going down the line, significant changes to the property tax system?
I think there have to be significant changes, and I agree with you about the over 65 aspect of this. What's interesting about this is, ask Bart Peterson about the effect of property tax. What's happened here is that the average homeowner in this state's property taxes have gone up 92% since the Republicans took control. 92%, and that's a huge increase. Okay, way beyond inflation. And in large part, it's done because they've stopped putting the same percentage of the state budget into education funding. We've gone from 44% to 36% that goes to traditional public education. And even if you add in the vouchers, it doesn't go above 40%. And that puts an additional burden on property taxes. Meanwhile, they won't even discuss this nonsense they have of scaling down the business tax and scaling down the income tax. Nobody even feels the income tax cut. Could you take that income tax to Starbucks or Hubbard and Cravens and get a coffee with it once a week? Probably not even. But multiplied over the state, it's a huge decrease in the income available, as we see from the projections this last year. There's going to be less money available. They need to stop those. They need to properly fund education, and that will have a positive impact on property taxes.
I mean, if they really wanted to stop bills from getting out of control, you have to just limit. I mean, isn't it really just limiting the AV, which, if you want to sell your house, you don't want to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are pros and cons to everything. I think the fascinating part of this two-year tax form is we got very vague general ideas on how to help homeowners or income taxpayers, and we got very specific suggestions on how to help businesses. And I thought the whole thing started with helping
homeowners,
sort of more basic citizens, and it seems tilted toward businesses once again.
Well, the chamber recently released parts 1 and 2 of their tax study, which very much highlight the business personal property tax seemed to be the one area where they were saying, this is kind of where we're a bit of an outlier and we could make real change there. And I wonder if that had an impact on where they headed.
Well, we've been having that discussion since Mike Pence.
Yeah, I mean, for a decade now, just about, on the business personal property tax. Is that the biggest change likely in terms of taxes in the upcoming session, is the business personal property tax?
On the depreciation floor?
Or even the depreciation floor and the minimum threreshold to start paying it probably too.
Oh yeah, no, well that makes no sense the way it's structured now. It makes no sense from a policy standpoint. So it's you can at least explain why you would why you should do that and why we're kind of an outlier nationally.
Yeah. All right. A committee tasked with making legislative recommendations on Medicaid once again submitted a final report with no recommendations. Indiana Public Broadcasting's Abigail Ruman reports last year, the committee chair said they would use any information from hearings to inform recommendations this year.
This year's Medicaid Oversight Committee chair submitted an informational report that summarized the only meeting the committee held. The committee did not propose or vote on any recommendations ahead of the 2025 legislative session. Democrat Greg Porter is the House minority member on the committee. He says lawmakers need to have meaningful conversations about what the future of Medicaid in the state holds, but only having one meeting cut off that debate.
We're going to be extremely vocal in regards to the lack of transparency and the lack of communication with the minority party.
Porter says people deserve to know what's happening with their Medicaid coverage. He also says the financial situation as a result of last year's Medicaid forecasting error is not as bad as it seemed.
Niki, we've talked on the show before how the role of legislative study committees has largely changed the State House. It's not really about coming up with draft bills or even recommendations much anymore. But this one was created, revived, but created specifically to say we need to come up with recommendations on this really important topic that lawmakers are trying to grapple with. How can they justify only having one meeting on the topic this year?
Yeah, I mean, that's real bad. But Medicaid is such a big thing, and it's taking up so much of the budget. To only have one meeting and no recommendations, that's honestly just a waste of money. That's a waste of paying their per diem to come down for that. And they say, well, we learned things. Well, let people submit a report or something, because, and I know sometimes there aren't any recommendations, but again, like you said, sometimes we do sort of the different than the normal interim, and you usually get a lot more, whether it's road funding or taxes or housing a couple of years ago. Yeah. And so that was pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, we have examples. You just mentioned the road funding task force, basically created the road funding plan, in 2017. The housing task force had recommendations, even the one we just talked about. Broad recommendations, but recommendations nonetheless. This comes on the heels of, over the last year, these families who are being most impacted right now by changes to Medicaid saying, you are not being open and transparent with us. Does this sort of thing just feed further into you're not being open and transparent?
I really think it does. I mean, this entire question is a political question. What services do we want to fund, and how does it affect people? It's all about budgeting and your priorities. And I think if a task force wants to meet once and hear the same testimony they're probably going to hear during committee hearings, and then not make any sort of directional decision with it, it's a signal to me that they don't want to take a position on this political issue.
You can debate the value of specific recommendations versus broader ones. I mean, with the tax review task force, at least we have a sense of where lawmakers' heads are at and kind of the areas. And so for the public,
where they're not at.
Or where they're not at. And so if you're a member of the public who's reading that story or listening to this program or watching it and hearing what those broad recommendations are, well, I'm going to write to my representative, I'm going to write to my senator and say, well, you're talking about this is what I would like you to do. On Medicaid, where are lawmakers' heads at? Do we have any sense of where they're looking at?
My 25 years working for a lot of that, largely in healthcare, I've never seen more attention on Medicaid. Largely, there's more people in the room, and that's of course driven by the percent that it's occupying of the budget. But I've never seen more attention on that program and how it's grown, and with good reason. There's more people that are on it than ever before. I mean, it's about 1 in 3 Hoosiers, more than half the babies born in Indiana are in Medicaid. So there's appropriately a lot of attention on that. So I think it's going to be a pretty substantial conversation this session. And I also think if you look at how Braun, we're going to get to it in a sec, but how Braun is kind of reorganizing state government or proposing to. I think there's going to be a lot of attention on FSSA generally, as like the first tier of agencies that are going to see reform. So it was maybe, not that I'm saying that was what motivated like having one hearing and not doing any recommendations, but it might have been appropriate if that was the case.
Do you think, do you have a sense of where lawmakers are heads? I think it's safe to say changes are coming to Indiana's Medicaid program. Mm-hmm. Do we have any sense of what those changes might be beyond what they've already been doing?
I think they're going to affect the people that are most vulnerable and the smaller percentages that can't object very loudly to those kinds of changes, and they want to do it in the back room. They don't want to do it under the public eye. because they know how unsympathetic their positions are. They don't want to deal with the fact that both the agency and the actuarial projections on this were way off, okay? Heads ought to roll on that. We should at least have a new actuarial group looking at our numbers.
Yeah, an outside firm who does
An
this,
outside firm that looks at it for what we pay for that, to have them almost $1 billion off.
They've been doing it for decades.
That
that's
may
what I'm
be,
saying.
but they're now not
Do we
so
need
good.
do we need a new one? Is
Yeah,
that the
and are
she's
they the
making?
same people that are doing it for decades, or do they have a new group in there that maybe isn't experienced enough? So they want to make the cuts that they think are going to save money, and they don't want to take the political flack that they should take for cutting the most vulnerable. That's where those cuts will do, but where they'll come in the back room.
I do think rank and file lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are hearing from constituents about the Medicaid wait list in particular, the waiver wait list.
Right.
That's affecting Hoosier seniors and children with, or younger Hoosiers with medically complex conditions. And there is a little bit of appetite, I think, to try to at least patch that hole, but we've tried to reach out to the leadership on that, and they're
Yeah. Well, Mike just teed it up a little bit, but Governor-elect Mike Braun announced this week he will reorganize the state's executive branch as he takes office. Braun says the redesign is aimed at improving efficiency, accountability, and communication.
The reorganization is focused on the governor's cabinet. It will consist of the lieutenant governor, state police superintendent, and head of the Indiana National Guard, and then secretaries overseeing 8 policy areas. Those policy areas include management and budget, health and family services, education, and business affairs. Beneath those secretaries will be dozens of state agencies, with one agency leader from each of the policy areas elevated to the role of cabinet secretary. Braun says the structure will better align state agencies. The Secretary of Management and Budget will be tasked with exploring ways to further consolidate state government.
Kayla, I think this has the potential to change a lot at the State House and the state government centers, but is it the sort of thing that citizens are likely to notice at all?
Well, it certainly seems more intuitive when you look at the structure, and it might help the executives in terms of having an easier sense of communication and knowing what's going on and being able to. But I think you really, for that to trickle down to the processes and the edicts that your regular low-level civil servants are carrying out every day, I think we'll only know once it starts happening.
This is part of, this is something that Mike Braun has talked about before he was elected and certainly after he was elected governor here, that rethinking the way state government is designed and operates. I think, is it safe to say this feels like just step one of that process?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I'm sure this is not the only thing they're going to announce. I think the secretaries that will kind of be at the top and then have a bunch of agencies below them makes sense. It'll be interesting to see, for instance, if FSSA head is also that secretary. That's a lot of work on one person. So are they the same people? Are they, separate people? And, what's it going to be like for, say, the Secretary of Energy to be able, will they be able to make direct changes in IDEM, for instance, over, So, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out once we get people in those roles.
Efficiency, it kind of makes logical sense when you look at, the workflow there. The accountability side of it, does this potentially improve that when you're going to have one person overseeing technically all of these agencies and then one person all of these agencies? Does that improve accountability if things go not the way we want them to?
If there are consequences of that accountability, if there aren't, no, it's not going to affect it at all. I think it's interesting that he seems to have already scaled back the lieutenant governor's responsibilities to what he's statutorily supposed to do. He doesn't want him out there doing anything other than what he has to let him do. And I hope this gives them the opportunity to rein IDEM in, not IDEM, IEDC in, because it's spending money hand over fist with absolutely no accountability. So if that happens, those would be good things.
How much of an impact can this make in terms of, you just talked about a little bit, the interplay with the State House and lawmakers?
I think for lawmakers, it's going to make it more digestible about who's actually in charge, right? It's like, it's going to be, you're going to have now these 8 people are going to be highly visible. I think the problem before was, not to criticize the Holcomb administration, but over time, and this is natural, over time that cabinet just kept growing. There was, you have over 30 people, and lawmakers are like, well, who do I? Okay, so I passed a law, it went to this agency, and then it went to where?
Yeah.
Like who's actually
And there was a
accountable
concern
for
about
that?
responsiveness.
There's one other area too, and that's either the higher education or job training. It seems like everybody, even the treasurer, thinks he has a role in that now. So those kinds of things that have grown exponentially need to be reined in.
Yeah, and someone's got to have a view over, see the whole field on what
Hopefully.
on what workforce development.
Yeah, it's hard for you're running your little agency to know necessarily all the way it interplays with everything else.
Yeah, so no, I think it's a great move.
All right, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Ann DeLaney, Republican Mike O'Brien, Kayla Dwyer of the Indy Star, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The opinions expressed are solely those of the panelists. Indiana Week in Review is a WFYI production in association with Indiana's public broadcasting stations.